A veteran judge sentences an animal abuser, then breaks every rule to visit the dog left behind. In a cold shelter room, she locks eyes with a creature that's already given up. One choice could cost her career, or save a life. She kneels anyway. And that's when everything changes. Before this story begins, I need you to understand something important. If you've ever thought, it's just an animal, this video is not for you. But if you believe that compassion can change lives, human and animal, then stay with me until the very end. Because the truth is, this story almost ended before it ever began. A single decision. One signature. One life written off as unworthy. And the person responsible for that decision never imagined it would cost her everything she had spent decades building. Somewhere in America tonight, thousands of animals are sitting in shelters, invisible, unheard, waiting for someone to see them as more than a case number. This isn't just a rescue story. It's a reckoning. A story about power, responsibility, and what happens when the law collides with compassion. As you watch, I want you to ask yourself one question. What would you be willing to risk for a life that can't speak for itself? If this story moves you, even a little, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe. Share it. Be the voice they don't have. Because sometimes, saving one life costs everything, and sometimes, it saves you too. Judge Eleanor Whitmore had delivered thousands of sentences in her 26-year career, but this one left her hands shaking beneath the bench. The courtroom in Marion County, Indiana was silent, too silent, as the final words left her mouth. 3 years in state prison. Lifetime ban from animal ownership. Gasps rippled through the room. The defense attorney stiffened. The defendant scoffed, muttering under his breath. Just a dog, he'd said earlier, like that explained everything. Eleanor didn't react. She couldn't. Her face remained composed, neutral, judicial. That was the job. Always had been. But inside her chest, something fractured. The evidence photos still burned behind her eyes, skin stretched tight over bone, a rusted chain, a food bowl overturned in mud. The dog had a name, but the court reduced him to Exhibit D. A mixed-breed male called Atlas, scheduled for euthanasia within 48 hours due to organ failure and behavioral shutdown. When court adjourned, Eleanor retreated to her chambers, removed her robe, and sat motionless. She told herself she'd done her duty. Maximum sentence. Justice served. Yet as the courthouse emptied and the daylight faded through her office window, one thought refused to let go. If the law has spoken, why does this still feel unfinished? Eleanor didn't remember deciding to drive. She only remembered the turn signal clicking as she pulled onto the highway, courthouse still visible in her rearview mirror. 40 minutes later, she was standing inside Haven Ridge Animal Care, still wearing her judicial robe beneath a wool coat. The front desk volunteer blinked twice. "Ma'am, are you family?" Eleanor swallowed. "No." She almost said, "I'm the judge who sentenced his abuser this morning," but the words stayed lodged in her throat. The shelter smelled like disinfectant and wet fur. Dogs barked from the front kennels, hopeful, desperate sounds. Eleanor followed the shelter director, Marla Jennings, past those cages, past the quieter ones, to a hallway marked medical isolation. "You should know," Marla said gently, hand resting on the door. "Atlas doesn't respond. We've tried food, water, voices. It's like he's already gone." Eleanor nodded, though her pulse thudded painfully in her ears. Inside, the room was stark and cold. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. 2 kennels were empty. The third held a dog curled inward, ribs sharp beneath thinning fur, eyes closed as if the world had finally become too heavy. Atlas didn't lift his head when she stepped closer. And in that moment, Eleanor understood something terrifying. She wasn't here to observe. She was here because she already knew she couldn't walk away. Eleanor knelt slowly, her knees protesting against the concrete floor. The robe pooled around her like a dark shadow as she settled in front of Atlas's kennel. He smelled faintly of antiseptic and something older, neglect that had soaked into his skin over years. "Hello," she whispered, unsure why she felt the need to keep her voice low. "Nothing." Atlas's breathing was shallow, each rise of his chest a visible effort. His body was curled tight, as if trying to protect what little was left inside him. One ear twitched, but his eyes stayed closed. Marla hovered by the door. "He hasn't eaten in 2 days. Vet says his liver and kidneys are failing. His ribs—" She stopped herself. "He's in constant pain." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. She had sentenced men who looked healthier than this dog. "May I sit with him?" she asked. Marla hesitated, then nodded. "I'll give you some privacy." The door clicked shut. Minutes passed. 10. Maybe 20. Eleanor spoke softly, not about the case, not about court, but about nothing at all. The weather. The drive. The way the world kept moving even when something inside you stopped. Then it happened. Atlas opened one eye. Just one. And he looked directly at her, not afraid, not curious, just empty. The look of someone who had already accepted the end. Eleanor's breath caught. If she left now, she knew, that would be the last thing he ever saw. Eleanor stayed on the floor long after Marla returned to say the shelter was closing for the night. Atlas never moved again. His eye didn't open. His body didn't shift. He simply existed, quiet, fading. "You don't have to decide tonight," Marla said gently. "But tomorrow morning at 8. "I know," Eleanor cut in, sharper than she intended. She stood slowly, joints stiff, and brushed invisible dust from her robe. Walking away felt wrong, like leaving a witness unheard. The drive home was silent. No radio. No phone calls. Her house greeted her the same way it had for years. Dark, orderly, empty. She placed her keys down and stood there, unmoving, before her gaze landed on her briefcase. Inside was the case file. She hadn't planned to open it again. Yet minutes later, photographs were spread across her kitchen table. The chain. The dirt circle worn into the ground. Atlas standing beside the stake, head lowered, blue collar faded nearly white. Her chest tightened. Not because of the abuse. Because 8 years ago, her own dog, Mercy, a gray-faced retriever who slept at the foot of her bed, had worn the same shade of blue. Eleanor sat back, stunned. That was the line. She'd crossed it the moment she recognized that collar. Justice was no longer abstract, and pretending otherwise would be a lie. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Atlas's ribs rising and falling, saw that single eye opening just long enough to say "I'm done." By 5:42 a.m., she was dressed and staring at her phone, thumb hovering. At 5:43, she called the shelter. "Haven Ridge Animal Care," Marla answered, already tired. "This is Judge Whitmore," Eleanor said. "Please don't euthanize Atlas." Silence. "Ma'am," Marla replied carefully, "he's scheduled in a little over 2 hours. We don't have the resources to keep him comfortable much longer." "I'm coming to get him." Another pause. Then a quiet exhale. "You understand what this looks like?" "Yes," Eleanor said. "I also understand what it feels like to do nothing." When she arrived, Marla was waiting with paperwork. Adoption forms. Medical disclosures. Liability waivers. Eleanor filled them out with the same steady handwriting she used on sentencing orders, knowing every stroke might cost her career. Atlas couldn't walk. Eleanor carried him to her car, surprised by how light he was, like holding a memory instead of a body. As she pulled onto the road, the courthouse appeared ahead, columns bright in the morning sun. Her colleagues would be inside. The law would continue without her. Eleanor didn't slow down. For the first time in decades, she wasn't choosing protocol. She was choosing a life. Eleanor laid Atlas on a blanket in the center of her living room. The house felt wrong, too quiet, too clean, like it didn't yet understand what had entered it. Atlas collapsed the moment she released him. Not rested. Collapsed. His legs folded as if they'd forgotten their purpose. His eyes stayed open, fixed on the wall. Panic crept in. Water first. Eleanor filled a bowl, slid it toward his nose. Nothing. She tried chicken from the fridge. Then rice. Then baby food from the store. Atlas turned his head away from everything, retreating further inside himself. By noon, bowls surrounded him like evidence of failure. She called the emergency vet. "He's shutting down," the woman said gently over the phone. In extreme abuse cases, sometimes the body survives longer than the will. "Bring him in tonight, but I need you to prepare yourself." Prepare for what? Eleanor sank to the floor beside Atlas and began talking, not as a judge, not as a rescuer, but as a human being with nothing left to hide. She told him about Mercy, about how losing her had hollowed out the house, and her, about how work became easier than grief. Atlas didn't move. Then the doorbell rang. Her daughter, Claire, stood there, breathless and worried. She looked past Eleanor, froze. "Mom," she whispered, "is that the dog from your case?" Eleanor nodded. Claire knelt beside Atlas and rested a hand gently on his head. His tail moved. Just once. Atlas ate that night. Not much, just a single bite of chicken from Claire's open palm, but it was enough to crack the silence. Hope crept in quietly, unwelcome and dangerous. By morning, it was gone. Eleanor woke to a heavy thud, followed by a sound she'd never forget. Atlas's body was rigid, convulsing, foam at his mouth. Blood streaked from his nose onto the carpet. "Claire!" Eleanor shouted, already dialing the emergency vet. They wrapped him in a blanket and raced through empty streets. The fluorescent lights of the clinic washed everything pale as a veterinarian rushed Atlas through double doors. The waiting room felt endless. Then Eleanor's phone exploded. News alerts. Missed calls. Headlines. Local judge under investigation for conflict of interest. Someone had leaked it. The adoption. The case number. The narrative was already written. Reckless judge, emotional overreach, compromised justice. 26 years of discipline unraveled in minutes. Judge Whitmore. The vet stood before her, face grave. "We stopped the seizure, but his liver is failing. Surgery is possible, but the odds are low. Maybe 20%. And even if he survives, his life will be hard." Claire squeezed Eleanor's hand. "Mom, if you do this, you could lose everything." Eleanor thought of the bench, the robe, the reputation. Then she thought of Atlas opening one eye. "Do the surgery," she said. And in that moment, Eleanor chose who she was willing to be. The surgery took 4 hours. Eleanor sat in a molded plastic chair, hands folded so tightly her knuckles ached. Claire leaned against her shoulder, half asleep, refusing to go home. The television in the corner murmured news updates, her name spoken by strangers who had never met Atlas. She didn't turn it on. Every minute felt borrowed. Eleanor replayed her life in fragments. Verdicts delivered without hesitation, dinners missed, grief buried under procedure. She had believed restraint made her fair. That distance made her strong. The door finally opened. The veterinarian stepped out, mask hanging loose, exhaustion written across her face. Eleanor stood before she realized she'd moved. "He survived the surgery," the vet said. "We removed what we could. The next 72 hours are critical. There will be setbacks, pain, fear." Eleanor exhaled for the first time in hours. 3 days later, Atlas came home shaved, stitched, fragile, but alive. His tail wagged weakly when he saw her. Eleanor carried him inside like something sacred. The recovery was brutal. Medications every 6 hours. Night terrors. Days where he refused food again. Eleanor slept on the floor beside him, reading case law out loud because the sound of her voice kept him grounded. Outside, investigations continued. Inside, something else was happening. Healing, slow, uneven, stubborn, was taking root in them both. 6 months later, Eleanor walked back into the Marion County Courthouse without her robe. The investigation had ended quietly. No charges, only a formal warning about professional boundaries. The sentence stood. The abuser remained incarcerated. But the bench no longer felt like home. Eleanor had taken early retirement. At home, Atlas was waiting. He stood on all 4 legs now, stronger, heavier, coat filled in where scars once dominated. When Eleanor opened the door, his tail wagged with certainty, not hope. He no longer waited to see if she'd leave. They had routines. Morning walks. Medications reduced to vitamins. Physical therapy replaced by play. The backyard, once unused, now bore worn paths where Atlas chased tennis balls badly thrown. Claire visited often. So did Eleanor's grandchildren, who learned quickly to be gentle. Atlas let them climb beside him, trusting in a way that once would have been impossible. One afternoon, Eleanor clipped on Atlas's leash and drove to an open field at the edge of town. She unhooked it and stepped back. Atlas hesitated. Then he ran. Full speed. No pain. No fear. Just motion and joy and grass beneath his paws. Eleanor watched, tears streaming freely, understanding something she'd never learned from the law. Justice punishes wrongdoing. Compassion restores what punishment never can. And sometimes, walking away from power is how you finally learn how to use it. 1 year later, Eleanor no longer introduced herself as Judge Whitmore. She was just Eleanor now. Mornings began with Atlas pressing his nose against her hand, demanding the walk he knew would come. The fear that once lived in his eyes had faded, replaced by certainty that he would be fed, protected, and loved. On a quiet autumn evening, Eleanor sat on the porch as the sun dipped low. Atlas lay at her feet, head resting against her ankle. Children laughed somewhere down the block. A dog barked. Ordinary sounds that once passed unnoticed now felt sacred. Claire joined her, holding 2 mugs of tea. "You ever regret it?" she asked softly. Eleanor didn't hesitate. No. She thought of the bench, the robe, the reputation she'd spent decades guarding. Then she thought of a shelter floor, one open eye, one life that refused to disappear. "I thought the law was about control," Eleanor said. "But it's really about responsibility. And responsibility doesn't end where the rules stop." Atlas lifted his head, tail thumping once. Some scars never vanish. Not his. Not hers. But they no longer defined the future. They were proof of survival. Proof that mercy, once given, multiplies. And proof that sometimes the life you save isn't the one you expect, it's your own. Before you scroll away, pause for just a moment. Atlas survived because one person refused to look away. Not because she was powerful. Not because she had all the answers. But because she chose compassion when it was inconvenient, risky, and costly. Right now, there are animals sitting in shelters across this country, dogs like Atlas, who won't get a second chance unless someone decides they matter. They don't need perfection. They don't need heroes. They need presence, patience, and someone willing to care when it's hard. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to this channel so stories like this keep reaching the people who need to hear them. Like this video so the algorithm pushes it to someone who might be one decision away from saving a life. Share it, because awareness saves lives long before rescue ever does. And if you're watching this thinking, I could never do something like that, remember this. Neither did Eleanor. Neither did Atlas. Sometimes, all it takes to change a life is choosing not to walk away. Be that choice. Be that voice. And never underestimate the power of compassion.